Hey there, everybody. Glad you're here. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. So, yeah, let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everyone. We are here to have another late night chat. Just the same way we always do them. First, I give my opening remarks. We follow that then with a roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations, and then I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if any of you have anything you'd like me to talk about in the second half of the show, all you need to do is send me a Rumble rant on the Rumble. You can cash at me at CalebMoppin22, but the best way, the absolute best way to send me questions is to buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee /Caleb Moppin. You can do it anonymously. You can do it however you want. It's a great way to send questions for me to answer in the second half of the program. So you all should do it. Get me something to talk about in the second half of our show. Now, as far as announcements, join the Center for Political Innovation. We are doing it, folks. We are getting stuff done. I am really excited about everything. Last night's stream, I cut into a video. It's going to premiere tomorrow morning. The slideshow from last night about the situation we're in and the weird divisions and everything that's going on. And so join CPI because we're doing it. We're building the movement and we need you to be a member. We need more people to become engaged and become part of the very, very exciting process that we are involved in. So much great activism is going on. People are reading around the country. There's reading groups that are being formed. And I mean, it's good stuff is happening. Great stuff is indeed happening and in the works. So become a member of CPI. Join the Center for Political Innovation, cpiusa.org. $15 a month to be a member, not a huge fee, but it's enough to get you plugged in and we'll connect you with local people and we'll get you going. So other than that, like I said before, we will follow our usual format. First, the opening remarks and then the roll call, and then I answer your questions. So send me a question for the second half of the program. If you're watching this live, use your power wisely. With great power comes great responsibility. Send me a question for the second half of the show. Rumble rant, Caleb Moppin22 on Cash App, or just go to Buy Me a Coffee and send your questions. It is you all that make the second half of the show what it is. So for the opening remarks tonight, wanted to talk about current events quickly. The biggest news development, I guess there's two big news developments, I should say. One is on the other side of the planet. They just started a parade. Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, Russian President Putin, they're all gathered in Beijing for the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Japan in World War II parade. It's a bummer that Trump isn't there. Donald Trump should be there, but he's not. But there's a great parade happening. I know after this is over, I am going to be watching that parade. I encourage you to do the same. I've already been seeing the videos of Kim Jong-un of North Korea's arrival and the videos of Putin's arrival. And, it's going to be a great display of anti-fascist unity and, commemoration of the struggle to defeat fascism, patriotism, and optimism that came out of the Second World War. Center for Political Innovation, we begin every meeting that we do with the anti-fascist pledge of the World Democratic Youth Federation that was formed after Japan was defeated, after the World War ended, after the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War ended. So, that's a big part of our heritage, that anti-fascist unity of the democratic peoples of the world. Yes, Vietnam is going to be there, and it's already a beautiful day in Beijing. So I would encourage you to start watching the parade. The other news item is that a boat that apparently had departed from Venezuela was sunk by the United States, and 11 people were on board. And the United States is saying that it was a drug trafficking ship, and that the 11 people on board were drug traffickers, etc. Now, they obviously have no way of proving that, and they're dead. Dead men tell no tales. We have no idea who these people were. But the story that we're hearing from Marco Rubio and from Donald Trump is that these were members of Tren de Aragua, the gang, which, according to the people that I've talked to from Venezuela, it no longer exists. This is a criminal organization that existed a long time ago that doesn't exist anymore. But it's become kind of the scarecrow of Trump's anti-Venezuela campaign. Venezuela is not really a big center of the drug trade. Colombia is a big center of the drug trade. El Salvador has certainly had their problems. That whole region has issues with drug gangs, but the idea that Venezuela is some drug, center, and that's why the USA is threatening them. We know there's a huge U.S. naval force built up outside of Venezuela. That's all very bad. It's all very bad, and I hope that this de-escalates quickly. They did, sink this ship, so I don't know what that means, and I really hope that this doesn't lead to anything bigger. I know Russia and China are prepared to have Venezuela's back, so that's a situation that I am paying attention to, as I'm sure all of you are. I did want to do something that I've done before on these streams, which is I am a subscriber to The Economist, the British Empire magazine, the British Empire economics publication. I get it in the mail every week, and every week they have a section called This World in Politics. And one thing I've done before, and I might as well just do it again, is I just go through this week in politics and I just comment on whatever I see there. So we're going to do that. We're just going to go through this week in politics from The Economist and react to the news items. I feel like that'll be a good thing to do. So first item, this week, at least 20 people, including health workers, were killed in Israeli strikes on a hospital in Gaza. Not the first time that's happened. 5 of the dead were journalists. Israel said it was targeted at a cameraman positioned by Hamas. Now, that's interesting, right? Hamas is the government, the elected government of Gaza. And so they're alleging that this cameraman deserved to die and he was a fair target because he was positioned by Hamas, right? So if you're in, Gaza, which is Hamas-controlled territory, and they tell you to go someplace, then Israel has the right to kill you. That's certainly disturbing. Think about that, right? If you're a journalist and they determine that somebody they don't like, told you where to stand, they can kill you. I mean, that's pretty indefensible. An initial inquiry by the Israeli Defense Forces found gaps that demanded investigation. Meanwhile, large protests in Israel have called for the release of the hostages still held in Gaza and an end to the war. This is a weird situation, right? Netanyahu continues to do what he's doing, what he's done ever since October 7th. And the Israeli people seem to want him out. And, the whole world is horrified by what's happening. And it's an ongoing situation. And that's why the Yemen Ansar Allah are the heroes of the whole world, the Houthis, because they're stopping ships in solidarity with the Palestinians. So there we go. Next item. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, a system backed by NGOs to monitor world food crises, confirmed that parts of Gaza strips are now in a famine. Just now? Haven't they been in a famine for quite some time? They're now calling it a famine in Gaza, and they've estimated that more than 500,000 people are already in Phase 5, characterized by extreme food deprivation, acute malnutrition, and starvation-related deaths. Wow. This is a man-made famine, right, that Israel is conducting against the Palestinians. I mean, and we're always told about, oh, if there's Stalin, there's a famine in Russia, there's a famine in Africa, there's a famine in China, it's communism's fault. Well, here we have an intentional starvation being carried out by the Israeli government, and the UN just finally noticed. Next item. The Democratic Republic of the Congo and the M23, militia backed by Rwanda, resumed their peace talks in Qatar. The two parties, which are engaged in a long-running conflict in the eastern Congo, had previously missed a deadline to reach a ceasefire agreement. Now, Qatar is a monarchy in the Middle East. It's one of the U.S.-backed, monarchy oil states. Qatar is aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. That's where Al Jazeera is based. And I suspect that the forces involved in this conflict are Muslims. And so that's quite interesting. Now, we know that there's been a big effort by the United States to foment Islamic extremism in Africa to destabilize countries, right? Part of why Ibrahim Traore, the great African leader, took power is because the United Nations and the French were failing to stop the Islamic terrorist insurgency in Burkina Faso. So Ibrahim Traore, in alliance with Russia, took power and started building a strong socialist country in Burkina Faso. And he's a Muslim, but he just doesn't like, Al Qaeda. He doesn't like Islamic terrorism. This is Ibrahim Traore, and that Mali and Niger also joined him in the Union of Sahel States. And so this is the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is Central Africa. But this is very interesting to hear, that there could be some hope for one of these ongoing conflicts coming to an end. You have to remember the Democratic Republic of Congo is very, very important because of minerals. It has vast mineral wealth. And there's a lot of minerals that used to be completely worthless. 10, 20 years ago, they were completely worthless. But now, because of their use in computer chips and cell phones and PlayStations and, and various, computer technology, they're extremely valuable. And that's why, there's all this talk about rare earth elements, and the United States is trying to roll back the influence of Russia and China in Africa, is partially because of these minerals, because China has much more access to these very, very important minerals. And the Democratic Republic of the Congo has a lot of minerals. So that's important to keep in mind as well. The French government is on the brink of collapse again. Francois Bayrou, who has been prime minister, that's not the official head of state. The president of France, Macron, is the head of state, but the prime minister is the head of the parliament, called for a confidence vote on September 8th over his deeply unpopular debt reduction plans. His minority centrist administration is caught between the parties on the left and the hard right in the National Assembly. Several have indicated they will not support Bayrou in the vote, which has described as a choice between responsibility or chaos. Europe doesn't know what to do because this Ukraine stuff, right? And, all these leaders are invested in the pro-US NATO status quo. And Donald Trump, it seems, doesn't really want the United States to be involved in propping up various governments across the European Union and rallying them to fight Russia. And the entire European establishment are people that have been in power on the basis of their alliance with the United States. And the new right, in France, it's Marine Le Pen, and the new right, AfD, Germany, there's a whole bunch of these parties, they threaten the status quo. And so the status quo is fighting for itself. And we see in countries like Romania and elsewhere, they just cancel the elections if it looks like, people that are not part of the NATO establishment are going to win. But the economy is getting worse. The inflow of migrants is not making things good. There's a lot of unrest beneath the surface in Europe, and the European people are starting to realize they're colonial subjects of the British Empire and of NATO, and that it's really the Atlanticists, the British Empire, and the Wall Street, London establishment that really dominates the European countries. They don't really have their sovereignty. They fought for their sovereignty in World War I and in World War II, right? The German Austrian imperialists tried to, seize chunks of the world and push back against the French, American, and British imperialists. And they lost. And then, World War II was the Nazis came to power and tried to restore German imperialism to what it once was, re-seize colonies. And we all know how that went. And the European mainland has largely been stripped of its autonomy. One of the main points of difference between the European mainland and the British and Americans is energy. The European mainland is all about nuclear power. The French government loves peaceful nuclear energy. And the Germans have just been forced to give up all their peaceful nuclear energy. And oil is how the British and the Americans run the world. They control the oil markets. All the big Wall Street and London banks are tied in with big oil. HSBC Bank, that's British Petroleum. ExxonMobil, that's Chase Bank. And it's also the Morgans. It's JP Morgan Chase. And it's oil monopolies that really run Wall Street. The European mainland, the Belgians and the Germans and the Austrians and the French and the Italians, they don't particularly like the world being run on oil. And that's why they support nuclear energy. That's why the French government has killed Greenpeace activists. That's why Israel murdered a French citizen who was working in Iraq to help them build a nuclear power plant. There's a complicated push and pull between the NATO countries, in particular the British and the Americans that really run the show, and the French and the Germans and the Italians and the Austrians and the Belgians and the Luxembourg and all of them that want more autonomy. So we'll keep going. Charles Kushner, America's new ambassador to France, breached diplomatic protocol by accusing Emmanuel Macron of not doing enough to combat anti-Semitism, telling the French president that his pending recognition of a Palestinian state will embolden extremists, fuel violence, and endanger Jewish life in France. There you go. That prompted an official rebuke from the French government. Mr. Kushner is the father of Jared Kushner, one of Trump's sons-in-law. That's interesting now, isn't it? That's quite interesting. And as we know, the French government did just go with Saudi Arabia to the United Nations and put on a big show, kind of criticizing Israel. Saudi Arabia officially opposes Israel. They don't do much about it. It's their enemy, Iran, which things have gotten better between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It's Iran that is the main opponent of Israel. Saudi Arabia makes noise against Israel, doesn't do much. And France technically supports Israel. But it looks like as part of the United States becoming more distant from Europe, the French are becoming more critical of Israel, and the Trump administration doesn't like that. Very interesting. Now, Steve Witkoff, Mr. Trump's special envoy, prepared for another consultation with Ukrainian officials in New York. Witkoff wants Volodymyr Zelensky to hold a meeting with Russian President Putin ahead of a potential trilateral summit involving Mr. Trump. Wow, a trilateral summit involving Trump, Zelensky, and Putin. The American president once again raised the threat of imposing very serious sanctions on Russia if it doesn't agree to a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Ukraine admitted that Russian forces have entered Dnipropetrovsk, an industrial region in eastern Ukraine, but said it had stopped their advance. Okay, well, we know who's holding up the peace talks. It's Zelensky. And it's Zelensky and the Europeans that are around him. They want to preserve the status quo in Europe, and that means not, bringing Russia back into any kind of recognition by their international financial system, and continuing their attempts to lock out Russia. And Russia has been willing to negotiate from the beginning. They wanted to do everything possible to hold off this conflict. So, they're going to blame it on Russia in The Economist, British Empire publication, but it's, we know who's responsible for prolonging this conflict. Now, the Danish Foreign Ministry summoned America's top diplomat in Copenhagen to explain why Americans with links to the Trump administration were reportedly conducting covert operations in Greenland to drum up support for independence from Denmark. Oh, boy. Oh, boy. All right. There we go. American meddling in Danish politics. I'm just laughing about that. I don't even know what to say. That's hilarious. I just find that to be completely hilarious. And again, if Denmark and the United States are fighting, I think that's a good thing. I'd rather have the United States fight with Denmark than with Russia or China or Iran or Venezuela. So I just find that whole thing to be hilarious. The USA is backing a Greenland separatist movement, right? We're going to liberate the Greenlanders from the Denmarks. You don't want to be a slave of the Vikings, do you? You want freedom from the Vikings, don't you? I mean, it's just, this is kind of hilarious. And this is the Trump administration jabbing the European Union. I just find it to be funny. A A former pupil at a Catholic school in Minneapolis shot dead 2 children aged 8 and 10 during a mass at the school. The 23-year-old, who reportedly identified as transgender, was suffering from depression and committed suicide at the scene. Yeah, I covered that shooting. We've talked about it on here. It's just a sign of U.S. society in decay, the Atlanticist pathology. And what's sad about it is that we don't have to learn anything, right? If you're a liberal, this is about gun control. If you're a conservative, this is about transgenderism. And we can all agree it's about mental health, but no one knows what that means. And we just leave it at that, right? Obviously, to some degree or other, this was a hate crime against Christians, right? I mean, this was a former Christian himself, who took aim at his former school, appears to have been motivated by hatred for the religion of his upbringing. Obviously most trans people are not murderous, and so there's no reason to paint all trans people with this broad brush. And neither are most gun owners. Most gun owners are not murderous either. So, it's this incident is horrendous. It is an absolutely horrendous incident. I think we can all agree on that. And people can politically spin it however they want, but it's just a sign of U.S. society in decay. And that's what we talk about in What is Innovationism? We talk about the Atlanticist pathology, how Western civilization first spawned the serial killers, Jack the Ripper, and now Western civilization has brought us the mass shooter. FBI agents raided the home and office of John Bolton, who was Mr. Trump's national security advisor in his first term. They have since fallen out. The search is reportedly linked to Mr. Bolton handling classified information. Well, this is really important because John Bolton is one of the main neoconservative voices out there. And John Bolton is also largely, responsible for the peace talks between the United States and North Korea being ruined. He ruined those peace talks along with Mike Pompeo. He undermined Trump's ability to make peace with North Korea. And John Bolton also is responsible for lying us into the Iraq War. John Bolton said that if Trump was ever elected president again, that the USA would leave NATO. He was leading the charge of opposing Trump. It appears that along with the Russiagators that are being investigated, he's also being investigated. And let's hope that there are some indictments soon from the Department of Justice against the Russiagators and against the people who lie us into wars. All right. Kilmar Abrego Garcia was taken into custody again by America's immigration authorities. Abrego Garcia hit the headlines in March when he was wrongly deported to El Salvador. He was eventually sent back to the U.S. The government wants to deport him to Uganda, but a judge has blocked that order until she can hold a hearing. I mean, however awful this guy should be, I believe in due process. In America, we tend to deport you to the country you came from, not some other country, or we put you in our own prison. The idea of, somebody comes here and breaks the law, so we send them somewhere else. That's a little bit difficult, right? I'm not liking that, right? Not liking that one bit. At a court in New York, Ishmael El Mayo Zambada, the founder of the Sinaloa drug gang in Mexico, changed his plea to guilty for a list of crimes including drug smuggling and money laundering. He was arrested in Texas last year after being tricked into flying to El Paso. Prosecutors are not seeking the death penalty for him. Well, let's be real. These drug gangs are nasty people. And people who claim that it's racist to claim that these gangs like MS-13 are nasty, those folks are delusional, right? They're nasty. They're nasty groups. They kill people. They torture people. They're nasty motherfuckers. And when people try to claim that they're not, they're really not helping their cause. I don't think that an immigration crackdown is going to benefit American working people. One of the main reasons for that is that we need the Latin American, Spanish-speaking community to cooperate with the police. We need them to call the police, and we need the police to be able to go into those neighborhoods and get the cooperation from the immigrant communities to deal with these gangs. But if they're all terrified of getting deported, they're not going to do that now, are they? and that the more you crack down on immigrant communities, the more these people fester and grow, right? The harder you make it for people to just walk across the border, the more these people get hired to smuggle them across and get them fake IDs and all the stuff that conservatives generally want to do. They're right. There's a big problem. These gangs are nasty. They do horrendous things. And there are dead bodies found along the U.S. border every day. I mean, it's bad, okay? And liberals who try to downplay the problem of mass migration and organized crime, they're deluding themselves. This is horrendous what's happening. That said, cracking down and terrorizing immigrant communities is not going to make it better. And all the things that they want to do, build a giant wall, have raids, make kids afraid their parents won't be there when they get home from school, all of that is only going to make things worse. So there we go. At least 34 soldiers were kidnapped by a dissident FARC faction, a former rebel group in Colombia. They were snatched during a military operation in an area known for cocaine smuggling. A few days earlier, a drone attack on a police helicopter killed 13 people. President Gustavo Petro blamed the dissidents and drug gangs for the spat of violence. Well, so for many years, Colombia's had a civil war between the communist insurgents, the Marxist-Leninist FARC organization, and the government. In 1993, the Communist Party of Colombia urged the FARC to sign a peace treaty. Originally, the FARC was the armed wing of the Communist Party of Colombia. But when the Communist Party of Colombia wanted to become a legal political party and join the government, at that point, the FARC ended its relationship with the Communist Party and continued fighting. And that's when Fidel Castro denounced the FARC. And he said, look, you guys, armed struggle is not something you do for 50 years. You guys have deteriorated into a criminal organization. You shouldn't be fighting as a way of life. And I think Fidel Castro was right. I even wrote an article about this. The FARC, Cuba stopped supporting the FARC militarily, stopped giving them weapons and such. And the FARC continued cooperating with drug gangs and such. And that's what happens. If you wage armed struggle for a long enough time, eventually, you can't just go back to ordinary life. If you killed police officers and you killed military people, you can't just go back to, work a normal job. And once the Civil War goes on for 10, 20 years, pretty soon it stops being a civil war and you just become a criminal. And this happens. You can see many examples of this. All right. The Naxals in India are a very similar case. The Naxalbari, the Naxalites, they may have started out as some kind of legitimate, communist group, but they deteriorated. They're just criminals at this point because they can't just go join society. They'll all go to prison. They've had battles with the government. Right. The NPA in the Philippines, again, they can't just go back and join society. Right. They've been waging a war against the government. There's actually a very good documentary that was on HBO maybe 2-3 decades ago called Bastards of the Party that said a similar thing actually happened with the Black Panthers. Many of the criminal organizations in the United States that in the Black community, the Crips, the Bloods, etc., started out as Black nationalist and Black Panther inspired organizations that just deteriorated into criminal groups. I even think about my ancestors on my dad's side that were, I think about, relatives that, were involved with Jesse James and all of that. And these were people that were in Missouri, which was a state that did not secede. It was like a border state. It wasn't part of the South. And there were Southern sympathizers in Missouri, and they waged an insurgency against the Union Army in Missouri, and they couldn't go back to normal life. And Jesse James is kind of made into a romantic hero by Hollywood, but Jesse James was basically just a Confederate insurgent in Missouri who couldn't go back to normal life. So after the Civil War was over, he became an outlaw, and he robbed trains and banks, both of which were associated with Northern capital, right? The slave economy of the South had been crushed, and banks and trains were associated with the North, with big corporations in the North. He robbed them. And apparently Jesse James even wore a Ku Klux Klan mask for one of his robberies. And the Missouri state legislature passed resolutions supporting Jesse James. It was very much, Jesse James was a Confederate activist who, became kind of a criminal. But there was this kind of, Southern populism associated with him, but he was not a Robin Hood. He was not a hero. He was just an insurgent, right? And again, he'd originally been on one side of a war, And then that side lost. And so, he couldn't just go back into normal society. He had killed Union Army soldiers. He'd been part of an armed group. So Jesse James became Jesse James, and became an outlaw. Right. And that's kind of what happens. And in Colombia, most of the FARC have surrendered, right? The FARC became a legal political party in Colombia. That took place during Obama's second term. John Kerry went to Cuba, and the Cuban government and the American government and the Colombian government worked with the FARC. And the majority of the FARC have joined the Colombian government as a legal political party. There are what they call dissident FARC, right? The dissident FARC, and that's who apparently did this recent terrorist attack. The dissident FARC. Those are wings of the FARC rebel group that didn't surrender. So there we go. China announced that North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, will attend the military parade in Beijing. Well, he's there. I've seen the video of his arrival. He's there, right? The leader of North Korea is in the streets of Beijing for the parade. Australia cut diplomatic ties with Iran after accusing it of being behind attacks on Jewish restaurants and synagogues in 2024. That's awful. I didn't know that. I'm sure Iran didn't do that. Why in the world would they attack? Wow, I did not know that. I should ask, some of our Australian viewers. We have quite a few viewers here in Australia. We should ask them about that. That's awful. I did not know that Australia cut diplomatic ties with Iran. That's horrible. That's horrible. That's absolutely horrible. I know they've been having big Palestine rallies in Australia, but I did not know that happened. That's awful. Ranil, I can't even say that name, was granted bail in Sri Lanka following his arrest on charges of misusing public funds. He has been the country's prime minister 6 times. His supporters insist he's innocent. Well, they have a pro-China government in Sri Lanka now, right? Sri Lanka is moving in an anti-imperialist direction. Marxist-Leninist Communist Party that's very close to North Korea has won the elections, if I'm not mistaken, in Sri Lanka. So because of that, I can see that, now there's, division, and that this previous prime minister is being arrested. And yeah, that sounds like a big deal. It sounds like a very big deal. So there we go. That's certainly important. Yeah. So, all right. And then South Korea's new president, Lee Jae-myung, met with Donald Trump at the White House, where they discussed a trade deal and thorny issues of America paying for the 285,000 American troops in the country. Mr. Trump raised the possibility of America taking ownership of Korean land that houses the American bases. That's interesting. Mr. Lee also said he was looking forward to success with Zelensky. Well, Trump said at that meeting he will be meeting with Kim Jong-un. And he also raised the persecution of different Christian communities in South Korea. That's not mentioned by The Economist. So that's just kind of the news roundup from The Economist with my comments inserted into it. That's something I often do on these streams, is I just read the news. So, if you've got questions, I see that I've got one buy me a coffee and one Rumble rant that have come in. That's great. If you want to send more questions, you can send them as buy me a coffee or as Rumble rants or Caleb Moppin 22 on Cash App. Those are the ways that you can send your questions. And I thought what I would do for the rest of my opening remarks is, one thing I've been doing lately is I just read my books on streams, right? And I've got a lot of material. I have written a lot, right? I'm waiting for print copies of the new book about Trotsky. Let me just add this. So my new book, Trotsky and the Neocons, I don't even have the print copies of it. It's just come out. It's just been released. That book is breaking records, folks. We are still at number 1. We are the number 1 new release in the category of radical political thought on Amazon. We are the number 2 new release in the category of communism. I don't know if you saw it. I mean, this book is on fire. I went on Kim Iverson. I went on Don DeBar's channel. I went on Jamarl Thomas's channel. I am getting invitations like you wouldn't believe. This book is making a splash, and it's because it's timely. John Bolton's just been arrested, or just been, had his home raided, possibly facing an indictment. And, this book is really, really making a splash. And I definitely will read it out loud on this channel when I get a print copy of it. But yeah, this book, we are at number 1, folks. We are doing it. People are anxious. And I don't know if you've seen the videos, the slideshow that I did before I even wrote the book, as I was kind of assembling the book materials. It's got like 8,000 views on here. Yeah, I do. I have a whole playlist of audiobooks, Shake and Bacon. I have a whole playlist of audiobooks of my books. So yes, that is correct. I do that regularly on these streams. I read these books aloud and then I cut them from the stream. So we have audiobooks. We have a whole playlist of audiobooks of my books. We've sure got that thing. We've sure got that thing. Here, let me link the audiobooks playlist. I'll drop it in there, Shake and Bacon. Audiobooks playlist. Here, I'll drop it in here. Yes, I have audiobooks of many of my books, and I'm going to continue doing that. That's one thing I've realized is a great thing to do on these streams. Just read some of the books I've written, and then cut them as to audiobooks. So yeah, here's the playlist of my audiobooks of the various books that I've written. And I was actually going to continue that tonight. I was going to start reading another short little booklet that I wrote. It's called The New Communist Movement, Party Building in the 1970s. Here, we'll get the new book, the Trotsky one, off of here. I'm going to start reading from this one, The New Communist Movement, Party Building in 1970s America. And I'm just going to start reading this. This is my history of the new communist movement. I'm not going to finish it tonight, but I'll read a lot of it. It's a short book. It's kind of like the William Z. Foster book. I wrote the big textbook, Out of the Movement to the Masses, and then I took the individual chapters and turned them into pamphlets, right? We got this one, we got the William Z. Foster and the Communist Party book, and we have divisions in the ruling class. Those are chapters from my bigger book, Out of the Movement to the Masses, that's huge. And I turned them into little pamphlet-sized books, right? That are, this book is about 100. This is 104 pages long. It's not huge, right? And I think the Foster book is actually less than 100 pages. It's 104 pages long. It's just a history of the new communist movement in the 1970s. It's got a nice image of the Vietnamese flag and the Mao Red Book, in front of the U.S. Congress, activists who climbed the statue there in the Congress. And, it goes over the period in U.S. history where there was something called the new communist movement. So I'm going to read this book, but while I'm doing it, please think of something to ask me about in the second half of the show. And I will answer people's questions in the second half of the show, and then I'll go watch the parade, and we can all go to bed. But I figured I would read to you from the book. So while I'm reading from the book, think of something to ask me. Send me a Rumble rant, Caleb Moppin 22 on Cash App. Or you can buy me a coffee, and buy me a coffee is probably the best thing to do. I like that. Money goes to me instantly. Send me a question for the second half of the show. I wish you could super chat me here on YouTube, but they won't let you. They've demonetized me. So buy me a coffee is the best way. Send me a question. Give me something to answer in the second half of the program. Buy me a coffee / Caleb Moppin. So while you're all thinking of questions to ask me in the second half of the show, I am going to start reading to you The New Communist Movement, Party Building in 1970s America. Many of the young Americans who grew up hating McCarthyism and Cold War conformity and became involved in protesting for civil rights and against the Vietnam War eventually became communists. For some, the awakening came sooner than for others. From the late 60s to the early 1980s, a wave of new Marxist-Leninist parties emerged, many of them aligned with China, most of them with roots in the Revolutionary Youth Movement 2 faction of Students for a Democratic Society. This current is generally referred to as the New Communist Movement, NCM, by academics. The various groups had very limited success throughout the 1970s as the divisions in the ruling class intensified. In a few places, most notably Detroit, the NCM had substantial influence over the population and within local government. The organizations played a role in some rather explosive events to close out the decade. And after Reagan's victory in the 1980 election, they began to fade in relevance and dissolve. The NCM is worth studying because, unlike the left that remained after its demise, these organizations had a more or less mass orientation. They sought to be a party of the American people in their millions, often specifically aiming to recruit industrial workers. The NCM's failure was due to a number of conditions working against them. The labor aristocracy was pretty solidly intact, and the bulk of the white working class rejected class struggle politics. China, the country from which they sought ideological guidance, was shifting its politics very rapidly and aligning with the United States. There were also a few fundamental errors in approach that were widespread and are worth discussing. Overall, the NCM should be studied and revisited because many of the lessons of the period absorbed by the current leadership of various Marxist-Leninist sects are incorrect and need to be unlearned. A new perspective on the politics of the era and its successes and failures is worth exploring. The New Left that first worked to support Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and end segregation, and then later mobilized pacifist marches for de-escalation and negotiation in Vietnam, was not a grassroots phenomenon. It developed because of big disagreements within the ruling class, springing from the wave of anti-imperialist uprisings around the world. The question of how the Black community should be handled, and the huge importance of military spending in stabilizing the post-World War II U.S. economy. From 1946 to 1971, the world experienced the greatest wave of economic growth in human history, referred to by economists as the post-World War II economic expansion. The USA had the highest standard of living in the world. Industrial workers could afford comfortable suburban homes with only one working husband, often without even a high school diploma, supporting a wife and 2 to 3 children. At first, the ruling class had swung in a right-wing direction, crushing the Communist Party and weakening the organized labor movement with the Taft-Hartley Law. But soon, McCarthyite fanaticism turned into a vehicle with which Bonapartist and middle-class elements could threaten some of the wealthiest capitalists. Meanwhile, the treatment of African Americans had been something communists had rallied against, and many in the ruling class felt it needed to be properly addressed or adjusted. The roots of the New Left began with the lynching of Emmett Till in August of 1955. The Black teenager, 14 years old, from Chicago, had been visiting relatives in Mississippi. He was accused of whistling at a white woman in a local store owned by a white family. That night, the store owner and his sons abducted Emmett Till from his home and tortured him to death. Similar vigilante killings by whites to enforce the racist structure of the South happened all the time. At Emmett Till's funeral in Chicago, his mother arranged for an open casket to show how brutally her 14-year-old son had been mutilated. Mamie Till explained her decision, saying, "There was just no way I could describe what was in that box. No way. And I wanted the world to see." Photographs taken by Jet magazine and the Chicago Defender of Emmett Till's corpse generated a huge amount of outrage. And as the news spread, many Northern politicians called for the murderers of Emmett Till to be prosecuted. In a 5-day trial in September, the killers of Till were found not guilty by an all-white jury, prompting outrage and protest across the country. The following year, the two killers of Emmett Till, Roy Bryant and John William Millam, published their account of how they murdered Emmett Till in Look magazine, saying they felt it was necessary to keep the local Black population, quote, in their place. Millam said, "I just decided it was time that a few people got put on notice. As long as I live and can do anything about it, N-words are going to stay in their place. N-words ain't going to vote where I live. If they did, they'd control the government. If they did, they They'd go to school with my kids. And when an N-word gets close to mentioning sex with a white woman, he's tired of living and I'm likely to kill him, unquote. Wow. The Soviet Union sent the image of Till's mutilated body across the world, and it accompanied William L. Patterson's document, We Charge Genocide, published a few years prior and presented by the USSR at the United Nations. In response to Till's killing and the Soviet Union's publicization of it, the Kennedy family and many Northern liberals organized vigils and protest marches in urban centers against racism and Jim Crow. Then, in December of 1955, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., with the financial support of the United Auto Workers, launched the Montgomery bus boycott, demanding that the bus lines in Montgomery, Alabama, drop their policy requiring Black people to ride in the back of the bus and to give up their seats for whites. Rosa Parks was quoted in national media explaining why she refused to sit in the back of the bus, saying, quote, "I thought of Emmett Till and I just couldn't go back." The Black community refused to ride local bus lines. The Montgomery bus boycott ended December 20th, 1956, after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the segregation laws on Alabama buses violated the U.S. Constitution. It was a victory that pushed the civil rights movement forward. Martin Luther King Jr. was chosen to lead the boycott because he was young enough to have not been associated with the Communist Party in any way. All the older Black ministers who were willing to oppose Jim Crow had some connection with the communists, as they were among the only anti-racist activists in the South. The Communist Party's Civil Rights Congress provided lawyers and support to Black people facing the death penalty in Jim Crow courts, and Soviet officials frequently condemned the United States for its treatment of African Americans. Martin Luther King Jr. became the public face of a new upsurge of protests throughout the country, called the Civil Rights Movement, using the term civil rights, which the Communist Party had coined in the late 1940s as its buzz phrase for pro-Black activism. However, the Communist Party was largely unwelcome in what was a well-funded, well-publicized mobilization paid for by liberals. Funding from the United Auto Workers Union and the Institute for Policy Studies, as well as various Rockefeller foundations and the Ford Foundation, enabled young Americans, Black and white, to attend freedom schools and get trained in the art of civil disobedience. The philosophy that they were taught was Gandhian pacifism and Protestant Christianity. These young protesters believed that they were helping to make the U.S. true to its democratic ideals and subjecting them to themselves to persecution and martyrdom while turning the other cheek in a Christ-like way. The freedom schools were known for their atmosphere of repetitive singing, chanting, and clapping. Mainstream media showed the police brutalizing young white radicals, creating a great deal of sympathy for ending legal segregation on a national level. Liberal TV hosts like Lester Crane and Edward R. Murrow lampooned McCarthyist conservatives and shamed Mississippi and Alabama for their apartheid conditions. Basically, a wing of the U.S. ruling class had decided that racism was hurting the interests of U.S. imperialism and was willing to help mobilize youth to oppose it. This created an opening for genuine radicals. John Steele, a civil rights activist who was involved in the 1964 Freedom Summer in Mississippi and who eventually became a communist, recalled, "What swept me into the civil rights struggle was in large part the utter moral clarity of what was involved, the clear evil of institutionalized white supremacy, and the courage and nobility represented by the movement, which was going directly up against it. Year after year during the 50s and early 60s, college-aged radicals joined African Americans in getting arrested at lunch counters and bus stations, enduring police batons, and calling for an end to legal segregation. In 1963, the University of California at Berkeley banned students from organizing around off-campus issues. This meant those recruiting for the civil rights movement and organizing boycotts of local businesses in California that opposed civil rights were forbidden from doing so on campus. Opposition to these restrictions led to a student uprising called the Free Speech Movement. On October 1st, students seized a police car after Jack Weinberg, a member of the Congress of Racial Equality, was arrested for setting up a civil rights table on the campus. 3,000 students surrounded the police car, and a speaker's podium was put on top of it. The students held the car for 32 hours, giving speeches on top of it, before the authorities agreed to drop the charges against Weinberg. The students later seized an academic building, and hundreds were arrested, dragged out one by the police. The leader of the free speech movement was Mario Savio, and his famous words on the steps of Sproul Hall before the students seized it on December 2nd of 1964 became an iconic expression of the sentiments of radical youth at the time, motivated by opposition to Cold War conformity. He famously said, "There comes a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies on the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it and to the people who own it that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all." Bob Avakian, a Berkeley student who joined the protests shortly after recovering from a life-threatening illness, recalled the civil disobedience arrests in his autobiography From Ike to Mao and Beyond, recalling, "People were arrested in an almost assembly line fashion. As they were arrested, a lot of people were thrown down the stairs, and the women in particular were grabbed by the hair and thrown down the stairs. I was on the top floor and saw many people brutalized like that. And of course, this was only a few months after I had been finally recovered from being sick. So besides being outraged generally, I was a little worried about what might happen to me if I got thrown down the stairs or otherwise brutalized, especially if I got hit in the area of my kidneys. And as my turn came to be busted, I recognized the cop who was arresting me as someone who had played basketball for a local college. I saw his nameplate say Gray, and I said, 'Aren't you the Gray who played basketball for St. Mary's?' And I kind of shrugged my shoulders as if to say, 'So what are you going to do?' And he replied, 'Sorry, I can't do nothing for you.' And off I went. Of course, I was very happy to be arrested, to put it that way. I wanted to be part of this, and there was a great camaraderie. When I did this thing with this cop Gray, I wasn't trying to not get arrested. I just didn't want to get thrown down the stairs and hit in my kidneys. But I was very happy to be part of this." Eventually, the university gave in and altered its policies to allow activism and political organizing among the students. Soon, the UC Berkeley and other prestigious campuses, including Eastern Ivy League schools, became centers of the movement, with students engaging in civil rights activism, often challenging the restrictions on their activities imposed by college administrations. Within the campus upsurge, the Communist Party USA and a few small Trotskyite sects were visible on the margins. The right-wing press made a big deal out of their presence, and the paid organizers of these liberal mobilizations did their best to push communists into the background and denounce them. Progressive Labor Party was the most visible communist presence in the early 1960s, making a point of publicly speaking as communists as often as possible. The Progressive Labor Party, originally known as the Progressive Labor Movement, or commonly just called PL, was a breakaway from the Communist Party USA, led by Milton Rosen, a college professor from Buffalo, New York. The group denounced the Communist Party USA as revisionist, and it sold its newspaper Challenge around the country, defending Stalin against Khrushchev and pointing to China as the center of world revolution. Progressive Labor Party was present in the civil rights protests and other mobilizations of the early 60s, viewed as a group of radical fringe. However, the organization began expanding rapidly as the political crisis intensified, having carved out its position as the most visible representative of communism in radical circles. Ramparts magazine sprung up in San Francisco's Bay Area, 1962, originally as a publication aimed at promoting creative writing among Roman Catholics. However, after a few years, the publication became a vehicle for exposing CIA activities and promoting anti-racist, anti-imperialist, and pro-communist politics. Declassified documents show that the FBI strongly believed that the publication was funded by the Soviet Union or by China, or perhaps both, but could never find substantial proof. The Bay Area magazine became an essential part of the political upsurge of the 1960s and the subsequent new communist movement. One of the main organizations of young people engaging in civil disobedience was called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, and it was led by Stokely Carmichael, who eventually changed his name to Kwame Ture. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee began using the slogan Black Power in the early 1960s, and it diverged from the mainstream of the civil rights movement by becoming friendlier to Black nationalism. A number of activists who worked with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee were young African Americans who had resigned from the Communist Party in 1958 after it officially dropped its support for Black nationalism. Many of them listened to the radio broadcasts of Robert F. Williams, a civil rights leader who advocated armed self-defense and had fled to Cuba. Radio Free Dixie was broadcast from Havana into southern states and featured calls by Williams for the launching of armed struggle by Black nationalists. Among SNCC activists who listened to Williams' broadcasts and considered themselves to be communists, a clandestine organization called the Revolutionary Action Movement, or RAM, was established. The group's aim was to create a new communist party aligned with China that would lead Black Americans to form a separate, independent Black republic in the South. Malcolm X met with RAM members before his assassination. RAM pamphlets and literature were circulated among young Black activists and civil rights organizers. Eventually, two RAM members named Huey Newton and Bobby Seale broke away to form the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in Oakland, California in 1966. This organization proliferated throughout the 1960s and 70s, facing heavy FBI repression. Among young white activists involved in civil rights, opposition to the Vietnam War and the draft became a new cause to organize around. The first protests against the Vietnam War had been organized by Youth Against War and Fascism and the Progressive Labor Party, but soon a new liberal campus group with lots of funding emerged. Students for a Democratic Society was founded in Port Huron, Michigan, as a campus-based activist group that opposed the Vietnam War, advocated for civil rights, and sought to create a participatory democracy that involved workers' councils running factories. The group banned communists from joining and received millions of dollars from a Democratic Party-aligned labor union in order to set up shop on the campuses around the country with a crew of full-time paid organizers. The founders included Tom Hayden, Michael Harrington, and Todd Gitlin, and they received significant salaries for their paid work, organizing a new activist group on American campuses. The organization aimed to push back against the military-industrial complex and anti-civil rights conservatives. The Progressive Labor Party immediately sent its members to infiltrate SDS, despite its ban on communists. And despite efforts to keep them out, the Progressive Labor Party found its way into SDS on a number of campuses. The Communist Party formed a network of W.E.B. Du Bois clubs for young civil rights activists whose members also joined SDS. With popular rock bands and mainstream media promoting protests against the Vietnam War, the movement grew in big numbers. However, the bulk of those involved were not communists. As anti-war protests grew larger, they were dominated by pacifist religious groups, counterculture hippies who spoke of a generation gap, and a wave of Eastern mystical religious sects with ties to the CIA. such as the Tibetan Buddhists and the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Hare Krishna. The intellectuals cultivated by the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom set the tone, and the New Left was up and running. The message was opposition to conformity, do your own thing, love your brother against the establishment of squares and fascists who were uptight. The Rockefeller think tanks, the CIA, the Ford Foundation, and a figure from the Kennedy administration named McGeorge Bundy were funding and fomenting a mass movement for their own reasons. Communists were always there among the wider mobilizations of liberal forces and around the world. It was communist governments that cheered the loudest in support of the Black freedom struggle and in opposition to U.S. military involvement in Vietnam. The climax of the 1960s political upsurge came in 1968 and 1969. In April of 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and every major city went up in flames, with the black community exploding in rage. A year prior to his assassination, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had denounced the Vietnam War in a speech at Riverside Church. In the speech, he said, "These are revolutionary times. All over the globe, men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression, and out of the wounds of a frail world, new systems of justice and equality are being born. The shirtless and barefoot people of the land are rising up as never before. The people who sat in the darkness have seen a great light. We in the West must support these revolutions." King denounced Marxism, began openly speaking in support of democratic socialism, and he became a friend of SDS founder and Social Democrat Michael Harrington. King was involved in planning a poor people's campaign at the time of his death, hoping to mobilize low-income people, both white and black, to engage in a series of civil disobedience protests in Washington, D.C., to demand an expansion of the welfare state. The death of Martin Luther King Jr. launched an explosion of rioting in the black community. Campus radicals at New York City's Columbia University shut down the campus in weeks of prolonged unrest, seizing campus buildings. SDS was the main organization leading the protests, with Mark Rudd acting as the spokesperson. Anti-war Democratic presidential candidate Robert Kennedy, who was associated with support for civil rights, was assassinated on June 6th. From August 26th to 29th, the Democratic Party held its national convention in Chicago and nominated Hubert Humphrey, a pro-Vietnam War candidate, for president, despite widespread opposition to the war. Outside the convention, thousands of students were beaten and arrested in the streets of Chicago at protests organized by Students for a Democratic Society and the national mobilization to oppose the war in Vietnam. Richard Nixon won the 1968 presidential election, appealing to the silent majority that objected to the widespread unrest in the country and promised a swift crackdown on the New Left and the Black radicals. In 1969, the protests against the Vietnam War grew bigger, and 2 national moratorium days and many rallies in Washington, D.C., with hundreds of thousands of participants. The Black Panther Party expanded its ranks, facing a heavy FBI crackdown. In the spring of 1970, when it became clear that the U.S. war in Vietnam had expanded into Cambodia, students' protests escalated. Students at Kent State University in Ohio and Jackson State University in Mississippi were shot and killed in the protests. To many of those involved in the protests, the issues of racism and the drive for war appeared more and more to be rooted in capitalism. The communists around the world seemed to be on the rise and correct in their explanation of world events. The layer of people who became communists before, during, or shortly after the uprisings of 1968 and 1969 went on to form the nucleus of what is called the new communist movement. An assessment of their experiences, successes, and failures is an essential part of the understanding that lays the basis for the contemporary work of the Center for Political Innovation. All right, and so that's the first 19 pages of this book, The New Communist Movement, Party Building in 1970s America. So yeah, that's the first 19 pages. We're going to keep reading it bit by bit, and eventually we'll have an audiobook for the channel. So why don't we do the roll call, names and locations, and then I will answer people's questions. Do we have any more questions that have come in? Oh yeah, we have another Buy Me a Coffee. Then after that, we'll be done. But yeah, roll call, names and locations. Who is with us? Jake in Portland, welcome. Mark Jones in Utica, New York. Frisia in the Netherlands. Welcome, Frisia. Kew Gardens, Checkpoint Charlie. Welcome, Checkpoint Charlie. Good to have you with us, Checkpoint Charlie. Names and locations. We got Marcos, Valencia in Venezuela. Luca in Singapore. St. David's, Bermuda. John in Florida. Rose in the Caribbean Sea. Welcome. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. John McCarthy in Chicago. Jenny in Cincinnati. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? On the road to Sydney. Woo! All right. And DJ Adam in Minneapolis. We got Washington State, the Lone Wolf. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Anyone else with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Anybody else? Names and locations. Nasser in Pasadena. Welcome, Nasser. Pasadena is down there in California by Los Angeles. Very good. Pasadena. All right. Anybody else? Names and locations. All right. Well, I'm gonna I will take questions for the second half of the show. We've got two Buy Me a Coffees, one from John and the other from David. We got one Rumble rant. So if you have any questions, now is the time to send them. I'll take them as Rumble rants. Caleb Mopin 22 on Cash App. Best way to send questions, Buy Me a Coffee. Very easy. You can be anonymous, right? Cash App is a little bit, people don't want to do that necessarily, but Buy Me a Coffee, very anonymous. You can just send your question. So send your questions. I'm here to answer your questions. I am going to put on some music, give you all a chance to answer your questions. This song is a song, a unificationist song from 1978. But I put it with the images of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon hugging Kim Il-sung. Right? Kim Il-sung is the leader of North Korea. The Reverend Sun Myung Moon was a lifelong anti-communist. But in the 90s, they reconciled. And so I took this kind of unificationist song, a kind of a moving rock and roll, song that the unificationists wrote in the 70s. And I put images of Kim Il-sung and Reverend Sun Myung Moon hugging to the song. So yeah, enjoy the song. It's about 4 minutes and then I'll answer questions. So yeah, send questions for the second half. Here we go.
The same in sorrow as in joy, with one heart I follow my Lord. For none on earth can turn me back, not even death can stop me. No, none on earth can turn me back, not even death can stop me. To barren valleys piled with bones, I will take the living message. To sad and foul and wretched streets, I will bear the word with love. I find my I bind my heart, my life to yours, that it may be an offering.
Yeah, the Chinese parade is very, very impressive. I'm definitely going to be watching it as soon as our stream is over tonight. I know that Kim is there. I know that Xi is there. Here's a quick video that was going around of the three heads of state, Putin, Xi, and Kim, in Tiananmen Square at the Gate of Heavenly Peace. This is the three heads of state celebrating the victory over fascism. Yeah, there they are leading the crowd. Look at that. Look at that. And there's Lukashenko from Belarus. He's also with them. Yeah, look at them. Yeah, that's the heads of state there marching. Wow, look at that. Look at that. Very, very neat. Lukashenko and Kim and Xi and Putin. That's Eurasia, right? Too bad Donald Trump is not there. That would be great if Trump was there. That was the proud moment when America aligned with the struggle against fascism. So yeah. All right. So now I answer any questions. So we've got two Rumble rants. All right. So the first question is from Leo Messi. He says Trump wants to send troops to Chicago and Baltimore. Is a new police state imminent? Why do Americans want this? Why do they embrace the indiscriminate ICE raids? I don't think Americans embrace those ICE raids, my friend. I think that, Americans don't like it and that there's a push and pull among the ruling class, right? The ruling class are fighting with each other. And that these Democratic Party cities, they're kind of thumbing their nose at Trump. Trump is sending the police there. And there have been, protests, and these ICE raids that are happening are not popular in the neighborhoods where they're being carried out. And so Trump is threatening to send the military there. I was in LA when this happened in the spring, and I covered that. And I don't think Americans are embracing it. I think there's a division in the ruling class. And I think that these Democratic Party cities that are very important in the USA, They tend to want to flaunt the White House. They're kind of allowing, more instability and protest to hurt Trump's image. So Trump is wanting to crack down on them. They're wanting to hurt the ICE raids because they view the ICE raids as hurting the immigrant community, and they view them, the ICE raids as Trump looking like he's enforcing immigration, and it kind of makes Trump more popular. A lot of his supporters really like the ICE raids, not all Americans, but a lot of Trump supporters, and so there's a push and pull. This is about Bonapartism. This is divisions in the ruling class, right? When a capitalist crisis breaks out, generally different factions in the ruling class attempt to stabilize society by asserting themselves over the rest of their own class. And that's called Bonapartism. And I've talked about that extensively. That's what we're seeing here, right? Is divisions in the ruling class, sections of the ruling class trying to use the state to assert their dominance and resolve the crisis at the expense of other capitalists. Now, Laura Lamb asks, who are you referring to as having put MLK Jr. fourth because he was not associated with the Communist Party? It was largely the United Auto Workers that tended to be the primary. The Montgomery bus boycott was paid for by the UAW union. They're the ones that paid for it. Victor and Walter Reuther were the brothers who ran the UAW. And there was a whole faction within the ruling class that wanted to start mobilizing against Jim Crow segregation. And the United Auto Workers Union, which had been purged of communists, was led by two brothers, Victor and Walter Reuther, who were technically in the Socialist Party. They were friends with Max Shachtman. They were kind of social democrats, and they were more activist oriented. And they wanted to mobilize against Jim Crow segregation because it was hurting the interests of U.S. imperialism. And there were a lot of wealthy folks, the Eastern establishment, the Rockefellers, others felt that Jim Crow hurt the image of the United States around the world, hurt U.S. relations with African countries, was a ticking time bomb. They felt if they didn't create some kind of safe civil rights movement, somebody like Malcolm X would become the leader of the Black community. And there was something had to be done about it. And so the United Auto Workers, they went down to Montgomery, Alabama, and they worked with different ministers and others. And they had to find somebody who couldn't be accused of being a communist. Because at that point, this was McCarthyism. This was the 50s. Communism was public enemy number one. And all the older pastors who supported the Montgomery bus boycott had been associated with the Communist Party. And in fact, the main, brain behind it was a guy named Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was kind of the main, organizer who really kind of thought up and organized the civil rights movement. But he had to be in the background, because he was, at one point, he was in the Communist Party and he became a Shachtmanite. He was a Shachtmanite Trotskyist. But he also, on top of that, he was openly gay. I mean, he was known to be gay. So Bayard Rustin was in the background, but Martin Luther King Jr. was young enough that he could be the public face of the civil rights movement. That's, and it's commonly understood, right, that if you were older than MLK was, and you had worked for civil rights, you had something to do with the communists. And even MLK, there was a poster that went around of, Martin Luther King Jr. at a communist training school. Apparently he had gone to some, workshop or something with a group that was aligned with the Communist Party. So they said that they had a picture of him at a communist training school, but Martin Luther King Jr. was picked because it couldn't really be established that he had ties to the Communist Party. So that was the reason that he was picked. And the UAW paid for it. And, the Ford Foundation was involved, the Rockefeller think tanks. There was a section of the ruling class that wanted to deal with Jim Crow because they felt Jim Crow was hurting America. It was hurting the USA's ability to oppose the Soviets, especially on the African continent. And it was a ticking time bomb that, the Black community was going to rise up. And if they rose up, they could be led by communists and we could have a revolution on our hands. And there were divisions within the ruling class, and McCarthyism had strengthened the military industrial complex. And, there were many factors that went into the civil rights movement ultimately emerging. So there we go. All right. And so I see Red Axis bought a coffee, and, and now there's three coffees that have been bought. So the first is from David Fox. He says, can you announce that we will be studying Khrushchevism, the book, right? Not actual Khrushchevism, but the book that I wrote, Khrushchevism, Khrushchevism, a study in psychological warfare. They will be studying Khrushchevism on September 14th, Sunday at 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. If anyone among the Australians are interested in joining, they should get in touch, and they should get in touch via my email. So if you're an Australian and you want to get involved in Alex or into David Fox's event, and his study group of our important book, Khrushchevism, A Study in Psychological Warfare, send me an email. My email is very easy to remember. It's just my first name and my last name at gmail.com. So if you're an Australian and you want to get connected with David Fox and his study group, a very important study group, check it out, calebmaupin@gmail.com. Thank you. And David does great work. David's a great organizer. He gave a great talk at the CPI convention, which is on the website, and it's on the YouTube channel. So there you go. That's like, what is that? Right? What is that? I don't appreciate that, James. Anyway, won't be able to sleep tonight because I'm too caffeinated. Well, I had some unnamed diet beverage earlier today. But it's been a while. I'm all right. I'm all right. Yeah, it is. Like, who says that? Right. But anyway, so then the next coffee is from John McCarthy, and he says, could you play a David Rovich song? Ideally, his Wisconsin in 1854 song. I've never heard that song, but let's see if we can find it. We generally are able to play David Rovich's music on here. I've never had an issue playing, David Rovich's music. So let's see if we can find this 1854 song. Well, what do you know? Wisconsin in 1854, featuring, here we go. We have a recording of it. And so I've never heard this song. I love David Rovich's music, but this is a piece of his that I haven't heard. So I am going to put it on. So, all right, John, you have gotten your wish. So let me just download, this David Rovich song I haven't heard, and we will put it on. We love David Rovich. He's featured in our Houthi book, by the way. His picture is in it. We talk about his song that he wrote in support of the Houthis. So we're gonna, we will put on David Rovich's song. I believe this is about an abolitionist uprising in the state of Wisconsin to oppose the fugitive slave law. Shout out to President Lukashenko. Absolutely, President Lukashenko is awesome. He's done wonders for Belarus. But there we go. All right, so we're just waiting. All right, the David Rovich song. We'll put that on. Because we'll always play David Rovich here. We love David. We really do. We really love David Rovich. He's a good guy. He's a good friend of our community. He really, really is. In many, many ways, he's a friend of CPI. And he's been very viciously canceled in the same way that I've been canceled. When you go through that, when you get targeted, the way that David and I have been targeted, you understand who your real friends are and how important relationships are, and that the left, the so-called left, is run by Satan, right? I mean, there are lots of very, very good people who believe in socialism and communism and anarchism, etc. But, it became it's very clear, right? Based on what David Rovich has been subjected to, what I've been subjected to, and all that, communist groups in America are run by sinister forces. And if you are a sincere person who actually believes in trying to make a better world, they will go out of their way to destroy you. They won't just, marginalize you and not let you be the boss. It's not about that. They will go out of their way to destroy you. And both David Rovich and myself have been subjected to this. I mean, they want you to just die. I mean, it's kind of awful people don't like it when I say evil, but it's kind of awful how, competitive and working against their own interest, the so-called left is. And that's why we've got to go out of the movement to the masses. We just got to build a real movement and not wait on the movement managers, not try to expect them to treat us with respect, because they won't, right? They won't.
there's so many historical events that that make humans look pretty miserable, and then there's also so many that make humans look pretty darn impressive. And it really, and oftentimes, it'll be the same period of time in the same element of society, you could say, and they behave completely differently depending on the circumstances. And one of the more optimistic stories came after the founding of the state of Wisconsin, which it was in 1848, and it was at the time there were a lot of refugees from the uprisings all over Europe that were killing tens of thousands of people at the time and overthrowing most of the governments of Europe at the time, and at least temporarily. And so there were a lot of refugees from Germany coming over, in particular around that time, settling in the places that were available for Europeans to settle, because the whole program was to move people west, give them a gun, move them west, go take that land. That's the whole program here. And but they came from a background where the whole question of the enslavement of human beings was a very important issue for them to be against. And they were freeing the serfs in a lot of European countries where they had a form of slavery, and they didn't want to have it here. And when the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in the United States, that said that anywhere an escaped slave was found in a free state or a slave state, they had to be returned to their so-called owners. And when that law passed in the Congress, it was very controversial in particular places like in Wisconsin and New England, a lot of other places. But in Wisconsin, they only tried to enforce the new law once. And what happened was pretty much everybody who had a horse in the state of Wisconsin descended on the jail in Milwaukee to free the prisoner. Gather round me, friends, I'll tell you a tale about the day one young man was taken off to jail and shipped north up Lake Michigan for a trial to see if he should be sent back to live in slavery. Life of bondage was what Joshua had seen. Then he left Missouri and moved to Racine, where he worked in a sawmill by the lake shore in Wisconsin in 1854. When the word got round, outrage spread. The idea of sending people back to the bondage they had fled was one that could not be allowed to stand, although it was the law of the land. Passed by the Congress 4 years prior, guaranteed to start a prairie fire, which was what would be in store in Wisconsin in 1854. Thousands went to Haymarket Square, the most people who had ever gathered there. In Racine, where they decided they'd go see how that trial would go up in Milwaukee. When they got there and looked around, saw the thousands more people on the ground who had come on horseback, ready for war in Wisconsin in 1854. Jail turned out to be no match at all for all of the people who had answered the call. They laid siege to the place till they'd gotten their man. Then together, thousands they ran away from the cops and then onward for the Underground Railroad brought him north. So Joshua Bluff
war would be a slave nevermore. In Wisconsin in 1854. No more attempts would ever be made since that Milwaukee prison raid to enforce this federal law after the rising that everyone saw. It was dead in the water, and that's a fact. The Fugitive Slave Act. When all the people said what they stood for in Wisconsin in 1854. Gather round me, friends, I'll tell you a tale about the day one young man was taken off to jail and shipped north up Lake Michigan for a trial to see if he should be sent back to live in slavery.
Yeah, it's a great story. And yeah, Wisconsin and Minneapolis, they were being settled by people who'd fled from the 1848 Spring of Nations, the revolutions that had swept Europe in 1848. And yeah, it makes sense that they would not want to comply with the fugitive slave law. Yeah, that's a great story. I'm glad that we were able to discuss that on this stream. Now, we do have one more question from Red Access, but before we do that, I just noticed that, I guess in coordination with the anniversary of the Second World War, Kim Iverson just tweeted out this short video from this interview. This interview I did with Kim Iverson, folks, this is there's a reason my book is #1 right now, right? I told you all that, Trotsky and the Neocons is now the #1 new release on Amazon. There's a reason for that, which is that I gave an interview to Kim Iverson, and this conversation we had, it was wild. If you haven't watched it, go and watch it. It's on this channel. On Rumble, it's up to 100,000 views on Rumble. We've hit 6 figures. The Rumble version of it has hit 6 figures already. It was a dynamic conversation about who the neocons are, etc. So at one point, she asked me about, well, what about these people who say maybe we were on the wrong side of World War II? And so she just cut a clip of that. So I'm going to show, this is a clip from the dynamic interview I did with Kim Iverson that is, that's got over 100,000 views and is, causing my book to just blow up in sales. Here we go.
A lot of discussion right now circling on X about, well, we should have backed Hitler in the war. Have you seen these discussions that have been happening all over? The question, did we side with the wrong side? Should we have opposed Stalin instead?
Well, those discussions were widespread in the lead up to World War II. Harry Truman said on the floor of Congress that if it looks like Stalin is going to win, we should back Hitler. And if it looks like Hitler's going to win, we should back Stalin so we can weaken both countries and we can dominate the world. And the America First Committee, which was a group of a lot of very powerful people that didn't want the USA involved in the Second World War. The German-American Bund had rallies in Madison Square Garden, and there were widespread discussions of that. And there was a divide, and it's interesting. It was the factory owners, the industrialists. They didn't like the labor unions. The labor unions were led by Marxists and communists, and they cut into their profits. And Roosevelt was friendly with the Rockefellers and with the British, that they kind of make their profits by selling oil to the world, by dominating international finance. So the factory owners, they were more sympathetic to the Nazis because the Nazis killed the communists and, got the economy going with all kinds of military spending. Whereas the oil monopolies and the bankers were more sympathetic to Roosevelt because they wanted to maintain their domination. And Germany was a rival that had been beaten down, a country that had been stripped of its colonies after World War I. And then Hitler came to power, and all of a sudden Germany was a power again, and it was seizing territory and claiming new colonies, etc. And so Germany was now a rival once again, and they didn't want to have a rival. And that underlying World War I and World War II was the tension between the economy on the European mainland and the American and British economy that is based on the ocean and global trade, right? The Atlanticist international order versus the economy on the European mainland. And the greatest fear of the British Empire and Wall Street has been the Germans and the Russians getting together. Because if they got together, then that would end British and American domination of the European mainland and possibly of the whole world.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, well, I'm glad she cut that clip because, this is an important data pointed out, right? There was a division in the ruling class. There was a substantial number of people in the American government who wanted to back Hitler. But there were others that for their own reasons didn't. And yeah, I'm glad she cut that clip. All right. So Red Axis asks me, after a lifetime of trying to educate people and mostly receiving insults in return, how do you still believe in lies over noble truths? Well, it's interesting. In the Khrushchevism book, I actually quote a poem that Stalin wrote when he was 17 years old about, how he felt like the people didn't want to hear him. They didn't want his truth. And that all of us that are, that are anti-imperialists, we all feel like, like the people don't want to hear us, I mean, that's a common feeling. But you have to find the openings, and you have to understand that, that understanding the complex way that we understand things, there's a mass line, and then there's the more sophisticated line, right? You can't expect everyone to get as deep into this as we get on these streams, but most people want jobs, most people want healthcare, most people realize the wars are being waged for somebody other than themselves, most people want their freedoms to be protected, and most people want economic advancement. And when it comes to opposing the wars, when it comes to defending our freedoms and civil liberties, when it comes to wanting economic development, we can win over a lot of people. People just don't know what's going on. And we are in a period of societal crisis where people are open to hearing answers. And if we can put forward policies, and that's one of the main things, it's not about truth, it's about policy. Advocate a policy. Tell people about that Bering Strait tunnel and how much money we could make if we weren't fighting Russia, we were trading with them, right? And tell people about the Belt and Road Initiative. Tell people about what Ibrahim Traore is doing and say, why can't we do that here? And put forward real things that our government could do. Don't just complain about the government. Don't just say we need a revolution, but actually say, look, the government could do X, Y, and Z. The government could, hire all the young people and have them rebuild the country. The government could put oil and gas and our natural resources under public ownership. We could set up a national bank and use the lending power to rebuild the country with a 5-year economic plan. We could enact an economic bill of rights. And that's why our 4-point plan is so important. These are real policies. It's not just screaming that you want a revolution. It's advocating real policies that could be implemented and saying, why don't we implement them? Oh, because other people have the power. Well, we need to build a movement so that we have the power, right? The only thing that can check the power of the ultra wealthy is a mass movement of the people. And I think that's the way to do it is to advocate realistic policies, transitional demands, transitional programmatic things that could be implemented to call for real improvements, and rally people around those demands and have people learn why those demands cannot be implemented, who's fighting against them, and what we need to get what we want. We need a government of action to fight for working families. One way to spot a phony, this is very common, is that phonies, they alternate between the maximum program and the minimum program. On the one hand, they say, oh, we just want a revolution. We want to tear it down and we want absolute civil war. And that's malarkey, right? That's not going to happen. And that's not realistic. There's no responsibility, right? You might as well want, this, you might as well want, Burger King and McDonald's to merge and, us to make Friday the first day of the week. And I mean, you come with all kinds of stuff, right? And then, in addition to the maximum program, which is something that no one can imagine, then they come up with, and then they have the minimum program, which is just being a Democrat. And it's things that the Democrats already want. It used to be those were kind of good things like raising the minimum wage and stuff. Now it's actually bad things that the Democrats want, like getting rid of the power grid and, like forced, political correctness and all kinds of stuff that are actually bad. It used to be that the minimum program was at least good, but that's what all the communist groups do, right? They have, we want a revolution. We want to tear it down. But obviously, we're not going to get that. So what do they advocate? They advocate what the Democrats want. They go minimum and maximum. Well, the work of genuine revolutionaries is you don't advocate the minimum or the maximum. You advocate the transitional program. You put forward real policies that, if they were implemented, would actually move us away from imperialism. That's what you do. and you rally people to demand those things, and you build a movement around a real program that would actually challenge the power structure. Not something the Democrats are already going to do, and not some unrealistic fantasy of revolution, but real policies that could actually be implemented that would move the United States out of imperialism, right? And that is how genuine revolutionary forces operate. They put forward a transitional program, right? And so that is the best way to engage with people, is to advocate policy, say, I'm for this, and give a program. And, you know, that sounds like something most people would want, and get them to understand why we can't get it, why we have to build a movement in order to get it, right? Transitional program rather than maximum and minimum. Maximum and minimum are a way to avoid agency. And that's the whole thing I was screaming about last night about I am, right? You know, if you're advocating the maximum program, you're just talking. That you're just talking to yourself, basically. You don't, you know, that's just silliness. And if you advocate the minimum program, you're just doing what the Democrats, what the mainstream, what, you know, the ruling class is already doing. But by putting forward a transitional program, right? A transitional program is a way to exercise agency, right? And that is the point, right? To say, why don't we have this? And to get people to understand that if, you know, the government could take all the millions of dollars they spend on wars and hire millions of unemployed workers and put them to work building highways and bridges. Why don't they do that? Why don't we take public ownership of our natural resources? Why don't we set up a national bank? Why don't we enact an economic bill of rights and invest in our people, right? And invest in our nation with education and healthcare to make more productive workers, to utilize the labor power of all people. Why don't we do these things? You look at the CPI 4-point plan, they're all things that the overwhelming majority of American people are for, but they don't think of it. Well, we have to go around saying we're for this, but it's going to take a mass movement to build it. And the reason we don't have it is because we live under globalism, imperialism, the rule of the world by big banks and big monopolies that are grinding the world into poverty to keep themselves rich. And what we need is an anti-monopoly government. We need a government of action that fights for working families. And that will break the power of the big monopolies and will empower the people of the country, right? And we'll have a government that works in the interests of the people and invests in people, kind of like the great African leader Ibrahim Traore invests in people and stands up against the imperialists and the globalist imperialist system. That's what we need to do, right? Right? You know, so there we go. And that is not true, by the way. It did not originate with Trotsky, Waba. That's a misnomer. The Bolsheviks, when Lenin came back from exile and from Switzerland, he brought the April thesis with him and the platform of the Bolshevik Party, and it was a transitional program: peace, land, and bread, public creation of a national bank, redistributive land to the peasants, you know. And every revolutionary government that has ever taken power has a transitional program. Right? You know, I have actually read on these streams many times the transitional program of North Korea. And I will read it to you again because it's a damn good program. Right? This is the transitional program. This is how North Korea took power. This is the radio speech, the 20-point platform, right? And again, it's not minimum, it's not stuff that was already happening, but it's also not, you know, some fantasy of bloodthirsty revolution. This is the program upon which North Korea became a government led by the Workers' Party of Korea. 1, liquidate all remnants of Japanese imperialist rule. 2, wage implacable struggle against reactionary and anti-democratic elements. 3, grant the entire people freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom of religion. 4, see to it that the entire Korean people have the right and duty to form popular committees. 5, grant equal rights to all citizens, regardless of political and economic life, sex, religion, or property status. 6, assert the inviolability of persons and their residence and protect by law the property of all citizens and their possessions, protecting private property. That doesn't sound very communist at all, but there you go. Abolish all laws and judicial organs that were set up by Japanese imperialism. Develop industry, agriculture, trade, and enhance the people's welfare. Nationalize big enterprises, transportation services, banks, mines, and forests. Confiscate or encourage free activity in handicraft and trades. Start small businesses, a micro entrepreneurship program. confiscate the land belonging to the Japanese and Japanese state traders and landlords. 12, fix market prices for living necessities to combat speculation and usury. Institute a system of uniform, equitable taxation and introduce a progressive income tax. Introduce an 8-hour workday for the factory. Right? 15, institute life insurance for factory workers and office workers. 16, introduce a system of universal compulsory education, public education. 17, actively develop national culture, science, radio, and the arts, including building theaters, libraries, and radio broadcasting stations and cinema houses. 18, set up special schools on a wide scale for training the personnel required in state organs, right? Train your government employees. 19, encourage scientists and artists in their work. 20, increase the number of state-run hospitals and stamp out epidemics and provide free medical care to poor people. Yeah, that's it. That was their transitional program. And that might not seem very revolutionary, right? You're gonna we just beat Japan in a war. So taking Japan's property, that doesn't seem revolutionary. Taking the property of Japan, you're gonna encourage free markets, you're gonna protect private property, but you're gonna nationalize the transportation system, you're gonna create a national bank, you're gonna create government hospitals to provide healthcare to poor people. You're going to set up arts and theater and cinemas. And, that's a pretty basic program. And that was the transitional program, right? And that was a transitional program. And that was the basis on which the Korean Workers' Party took power, right? And that the Chinese Communist Party was land to the tiller, redistribute the land, protection of democratic rights. You look at wherever they've had a revolution, they've had a transitional program. Trotsky has a particular thing about it, right? Leon Trotsky, the transitional program, that whole thing, that's Trotsky, right? And he takes it in a whole different direction. But this is just a reality, right? And that the maximum and minimum program is a way to hide, right? For example, at the end of the Communist Manifesto, they have 10 points, right? Those 10 planks, that's a transitional program. The 10 planks at the end of the Communist Manifesto are a transitional program that he wrote for Germany in 1848. It's just, 10 things they could implement. He says, ultimately, we want, public ownership of the means of production, centralization of the instruments of production in the hands of the state. But then he lists a 10-point platform at the end, right? And it's 10 things that could be implemented, right? And that the minimum maximum program is a way to hide. There is a mobilization. This is another Buy Me a Coffee from John McCarthy. Going on to get Mumia Abu-Jamal eye surgery that the Bureau of Prisons is denying him. I actually heard from the Mumia Coalition about this. And they are actually, if I'm not mistaken, they organized kind of a caravan to go to the prison. Mumia Abu-Jamal, his eyesight, at this point, he can't see. And they are denying him eye surgery. And it's pretty awful. And he can't write, he can't read. He's basically got an eye condition, and they're not giving him proper medical care. Mumia Abu-Jamal is innocent, charged falsely with killing a police officer. They tried to kill him in the 1990s. They tried to give him the death penalty, but there was a global upsurge that involved the Pope and thousands of people from all over the world going to Philadelphia, and they stopped the execution. And he remains in prison. But now they're denying him eye surgery. So that's very important. John, if you have a petition or something that people can sign around that issue or raise that issue, I did hear from the Free Mumia Coalition about that. And yeah, I'm with Mumia, and he should have the right to have eye surgery. It's basic medical care. He should be provided as a prisoner. No one should be kept without their eyesight. That is a crime. Yeah. So very good, folks. Well, listen, go watch the parade. There's a great parade happening right now to celebrate the victory over fascism. Go and watch that parade. Go and watch it. And we'll be in touch. If I stream tomorrow, it'll be later than usual. It'll probably be around 10:30 because we have our recruitment meeting, our recruitment check-in every Wednesday for CPI. So I do that 9 to 10, but it'll be 10:30 if I come on tomorrow night. So it'll be a later than usual late night stream. But we're going to, I want to do these streams as much as I possibly can. Look, the book is on fire. CPI is on fire right now. So yeah, dare to struggle, dare to win. Talk to you soon, everybody.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.